Hello, everyone. Welcome to this presentation from Saguenay Native Plant Community. I am Kathy Bryla, and I am joined here by Lexi Neubauer. Say hi, Lexi.
Good evening, everyone.
We are going to present tonight beautiful and easy native plants for pollinators. As we enter this gardening season and are looking to add some plants to our landscapes this spring and summer, we want to be sure to add some beautiful and easy native plants for our dear pollinators. Let's start by talking about what is pollination. And we throw this term around a lot. We talk about pollinators. We talk about how pollinators are decreasing, how that's not sustainable because we need their pollination services. What really is pollination and why is it so important?
All right, so pollination is the transfer of pollen from the male anther of a flower to the female stigma. This fertilization results in the formation of a seed. The seed will drop to the ground, blow in the wind, or be carried by birds and other animals. If it lands in a proper environment, it will germinate and become a new plant. And so flowers are really the tools that plants use to make their seeds, and that's why they're so important. And we're going to talk about what helps us with pollination.
It's so interesting when you learn more about it and the different markings on different flowers and how those markings, I mean, the flowers, they are beautiful and they're beautiful and colorful the way they are because they are made that way to attract the very pollinators that they need to pollinate and reproduce. And that's why we're not going to get in depth to that, but certain markings on flowers that draw pollinators down to where they would touch the pollen. And so this is something that the bees have, I mean the flowers have to purposely attract those pollinators to do the pollination. And incidentally, I'm just going to mention that that's one of the reasons, or the main reason, why cultivars of native plants have been found to um, not really be much near as much service to our pollinators if especially if that cultivation has led to a color change or a difference in the pattern of the colors in a flower, because our native pollinators have co-evolved and they see certain colors and certain markings. So if the color is changed or the markings on the flower has changed, then those plants certainly are not as serviceable to our pollinators. Just wanted to
And
throw that little thing in.
well, and the way we see a flower is very different from the way an insect sees a flower. So, as you mentioned, they see different things. There's actually ultraviolet characteristics to our native flowers that we can't see, but the bees see. And that's what attracts them to the flowers. It's so cool.
It's very cool when you see things through like a bee's eyes. It's amazing. I mean, there's certain things that, like a photo where they try to um, duplicate what it would look like through a bee's eye. It's very, very cool. Okay, and some plants, such as rice, corn, grasses, and conifers, are wind pollinated. However, it's been found that if they are pollinated by, uh, and then even some plants like vanilla and so on, sometimes, humans like artificially pollinate them. But it's been found that plants that more than 75% of pollination is done by insects and other animals. So yes, could we survive on wind pollinated foods? Probably yes, if you want to survive on rice, corn, grasses, conifers. I don't know if we want to eat conifers, but it's for sure not going to be as well rounded of a diet, as tasty of a diet, as healthy of a diet, and we probably wouldn't have as long of a lifespan because of the lesser nutrition. So 75% of our pollination needs those insects and the other animals that perform pollination services.
And more than 150 food crops in the US depend on pollination. So if you like almonds, if you like avocados, if you like coffee, not usually grown here, but any of these foods depend on pollination. So crops, like Kathy said, they're larger, more flavorful, and more abundant when pollinated. So we really need our pollinators to help us. And I think another thing that's so interesting about this whole cycle of life and with the flowers and the insects and everything is that the pollination is really just a consequence of this animal's activity on the flower. It's often collecting the pollen for its young. It's collecting the nectar for it to feed on. It needs so much energy to build its hive and provide for its young. So pollination, it's actually when the little strands of pollen attach, or they attach to the body of the insect, or like here on this bee, we see this little pollen sac, which is a combination of the nectar stickiness and the pollen sticking to it on the hind leg of this bumblebee.
Isn't he cute?
So cute and fuzzy.
Okay, so we think of pollen and we think of food. I mean, pollination and food production, and that is huge. And as we just discussed, it's extremely important. But believe it or not, and I don't mean this as a pun, uh, it's pretty much the icing on the cake as to what pollination services do. Remember that pollination or pollinated plants, pollination is key to the reproduction of wild plants. And those wild plants, in addition to food, they are what produce oxygen, sequester carbon. Plants are the lungs of the earth and require pollination to perform this crucial role. So I am not exaggerating to say that the quality of the air we breathe is reliant on pollinated plants, and those pollinated plants are reliant on our pollinators.
Pollination also helps purify water and prevent erosion. With all of these plants that, with their roots, they hold the soil in place. So the foliage cover breaks up the force of precipitation falling on the ground, which otherwise might cause erosion. And one of the special things about our native plants is that the roots go so deep into the soil. That's why they can survive drought. That's why they can survive fire. They know these conditions, but they also prevent erosion, which is really important when you think about all these crazy storms that we have lately, and just kind of what's happening with the weather. And a lot of it's due to, the lack of native plants that we have, and the turf grass that's everywhere instead of them. So.
Exactly, and you talk about those deep roots, and we talked previously about the quality of our water. Those deep roots act as a filter, and they help filter some of the chemicals as the water is moving through those deep roots. They help filter some of the chemicals out of our water to before they go into our storm sewers. So again, improving the quality of our water. And speaking of water, the water cycle that supports all life depends on pollinated plants. Those pollinated plants return moisture to the atmosphere and control our weather. So we need moisture, we need weather, we need rain, and we need plants to have that, and we need pollinators to pollinate those plants so that they can reproduce. Otherwise, as they would die out, there would be nothing to take their place.
And just looking at this image, this is actually the rainforest. And the reason why the rainforest is so important is because these plants are storing all of that water, and they kind of let it up back into the atmosphere in this mist. But even our native plants, our small plants, our forbs, do the same thing. It might not be on this dramatic of a scale, but they retain energy as well. And when it's cold, they keep it, but when it's hot, they use it to actually cool down. And that's this evaporation that we're seeing that goes up into the atmosphere. So even though you might not see it, it's there and it's happening.
Did you ever, I mean, you could walk through a forest or a place where there's a lot of plants, And even on a shady day, I mean, you could say, yes, the forest is, providing shade, so it's cooling it. But when you go in and you feel the difference and the dampness that is in a forest versus not in there, and you really can feel the moisture that is emanating from those plants around you.
And that's why it smells so good, I think, too,
Yes,
right?
I think you're right. So, who are our pollinators? We keep throwing this word pollinators around. We have a lot of different types of pollinators that are out in our landscapes working for us. One is our bees, butterflies, moths, flies, wasps. Yes, they have a place. They do some good services and they do other ecosystem services. I know they can be annoying, but especially yellow jackets, which I'll get to in a minute. Beetles, birds, like that cute little hummingbird down there, and bats and small mammals. Now, I want to say one thing about butterflies and moths. We pretty much all, I would think, most of us love butterflies. Although I did meet somebody like years ago, I knew somebody who was afraid of them, and I couldn't understand that. But for the most part, we all love those gentle, lovely creatures. A lot of people don't think too much about moths, and I want to say that moths are really, they're a powerhouse of our ecosystem. There's so many more varieties of moths than there are butterflies, and we're not getting into this in this talk, but those moths and their caterpillars are pretty much the foundation of our food chain, because as we've talked about on other presentations, that like those caterpillars are so needed by birds. And if you want to check out our, I think it was it our last video that we did where it was beautiful and easy native plants for birds, you'll see like why certain plants are so important for birds, and it all comes down to caterpillars. It's butterflies and moths. Their larva is critical to birds and on up the food chain. And really, even though butterflies get, they're the show because we see them during the day, those moths are creating a lot more caterpillars than the butterflies are. So I wanted to mention that when it's the difference. So please, give respect to those nighttime moths. They really are doing great, great work for us out there. Another thing I wanted to bring up is bees. I know a lot of people don't like bees. They're afraid of bees. They feel like if they plant native plants or a pollinator garden, they're afraid of attracting bees. I just, we at Sag Moraine try to do, we try to do some PR work for bees because they've gotten kind of a bum rap over time, largely because they're blamed for stinging when it's really the yellow jacket wasp that is responsible for most stings. The European honeybees that we brought over to, you know, uh, pollinate our crops, mostly because our native bees all died out, those can be a little bit aggressive if you're messing around with their very large hives. But our native bees, other than bumblebees, most of them are solitary, which means they are not at all aggressive. They're not protecting a hive. They just lay their eggs in small cavities with a pollen ball, and then they move on. Bumblebees do form small hives, but they are, certainly they can sting, but they're certainly not, wanting to sting. They're not aggressive per se. They will only sting you if you're going to bother their hive. They don't, or if you step on them in the grass. Most of our native bees don't even have stingers, and they're completely harmless. And the ones that do, like the bumblebees, as I said, they're going to sting where their hive is. And their hive is not going to be in the middle of your garden because they don't like all of the action going around by their garden. You're going to be more likely to encounter a bumblebee hive in some dirt patch behind your garage than you are in the middle of your garden. And then when we talk about them bees being blamed for the stings of wasps, primarily the yellow jacket wasps. Yes, wasps will come to flowers, but they're going to be more likely to come to your can of pop or your hamburger. So don't think that your garden or adding some native plants is going to bring an excessive amount of yellow jacket wasps around. I mean, that isn't the case. So just wanted to give a little plug for bees because they are by and large, no competition, our number one pollinator. And native bees, in fact, are way more efficient than even the European honeybees that we are so dependent on in our farmlands. And in fact, one species of native bee, the mason bee, that's out in the spring and is responsible for a lot of the pollination of our fruit trees. One mason bee can do the pollination of 200 honeybees. So our native bees are just such efficient and such wonderful pollinators. So I just wanted to, put that in. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, Lexi?
Yeah, just that in the United States, we have over 4,000 species of native bees. So we really need to protect and ensure their survival. And that really depends on us planting native plants. And part of the problem is that those European honeybees are competing with our native bees for the nectar and pollen resources. And that's why it's so critical to plant these pollinator gardens, is because we're giving them back those resources that they really need. And if you have a neighbor that has that is keeping honeybees, I have a couple. Those bees will probably come over and look for your plants too. But if you have an abundance of plants, that's going to
There's
give
enough
them
for all.
yeah, give them a variety to go by. And I just wanted to mention one quick thing about flies, because I've been seeing this a lot lately, and it's something I just kind of learned recently. But that there are many flies that look like bees. They're called bee mimics. And so you might be seeing something and think, oh, that's a bee or that's a little tiny bee, but it could just be a fly. And flies are actually pollinators too. But the way you can tell them apart is if the bees have two sets of wings where the flies only have one. So you'll start to become, a little bit of an expert as you start to pay attention to all these different creatures in your backyard. And this week, I actually saw for the first time a hummingbird moth.
Good, you saw one. Awesome.
Yes, or a clear wing. Maybe I've got the name wrong, but it
Clear-winged
looks
hummingbird moth. Yes.
clear wing hummingbird moth. It looks like a bee, but it kind of hovers like a hummingbird and it's just very small. And it kept following me around. And I thought, what a treat. I got to learn about a different type of creature this week. So,
Those are diurnal daytime moths. They are very cute. You're right. They're kind of like a, a cross between a bee, a moth, and a hummingbird. They are cool. Okay.
okay, so our pollinators come to flowers in search of nectar to feed on or pollen to feed their young. So we're going to be going over a couple of different plants today that are going to be very attractive to our pollinators, and specifically for our bees, and then also ones that are larval host plants for our butterflies and moths. The ones that are typically visited by bees are full of nectar. They're brightly colored with petals that are usually blue or yellow or a mixture of these. Bees themselves cannot see red. They're sweetly aromatic or have a minty fragrance. The flowers are open in the daytime. They provide landing platforms and they're often symmetrical, where one side of the flower is a mirror image of the other. And they really like tubular flowers that have nectar at the base of the tube. So as we look at these different plants, we'll see how these different shapes and characteristics kind of play out, but they're all designed to interact successfully with our pollinators and have, like Kathy said, co-evolved together.
So now what we're going to do, we're going to go over specific native plants that are very attractive and provide great resources for pollinators. These aren't the only native plants that pollinators love, but they are some of their favorites. And they are ones that will do very well in your garden and that will look beautiful in a residential landscape. They're appropriate for any size landscape, including smaller urban landscapes. And all of these following plants are hardy, dependable, and very versatile. And before we dig into the specific plants, I just want to ask everyone, if you like this content, please subscribe to our channel so this content will appear for more and more people to help us help our pollinators and our birds and our ecosystem. So please subscribe.
Okay, so two things we're going to cover for each of these plants are the plant hardiness zone. So most people are pretty familiar with this. Oh, I'm in zone 3, I'm in zone 5, and to only work with plants that are going to do well in your area. We're going to take it one step further tonight and also show you a place where the native range, we have native range maps for all of the plants, so you can see exactly where the plants are native to and hopefully extend into your area, or if not, you can find something that is native to your area. But we're just outside of Chicago and we're in zone 6A. There are some suburbs surrounding us that are in 5B. So on the map there, you can see in Illinois, we're a little patch of green by Lake Michigan. Some of our friends out west of us are going to be in the blue, but we'll specify the plant hardiness zone for each of these plants we're going to go over.
So this is from the BONAP website, the Biota of North America program. And you can go to bonap.org if you wanted to research a native plants range. But we'll be showing this map for each of these plants. And as you can see here, this is an example one for little blue stem. And you can see if it's in the dark green, it shows that it's present in the state. If it's light green, it shows that it's present in that county and native. And so the different colors mean, but basically what you're going to be paying attention to is whether it's green or whether it's brown, because brown means that it's not present in that state.
And then some where if it's yellow on the map, that means it's present and rare. So it's rare to find that plant right now, which is unfortunate for some of these plants.
Absolutely.
Okay, so our first plant that we're going over is one that's just about to bloom. We had a hailstorm today, so I don't know if my blooms got knocked off my wild columbine, but who knows? That's nature. We can't control it. But this is such a gorgeous plant, and it has these very intricate red and yellow bell-like flowers. And this attracts a huge variety of pollinators. It has deep nectar sources that are perfectly shaped for hummingbirds and long-tongued insects. So one of our most popular long-tongued insects is the bumblebee, but there are other ones like moths that also can reach into the deep nectaries and get that nectar. So this one, it grows only 1 to 3 feet tall, so it's a very pretty short little plant, and it likes medium to dry soil. The nice thing about this one is it does well in full sun to full shade, so you've got a lot of range there. Dappled sunlight will work great too. Blooms May and June, so that's why we're just starting. It is a larval host plant, and we're going to show this on the next slide for the columbine dusky wing. But this is a super adaptable plant, and it's one of the few red native plants in the Midwest. This grows in zones 3 to 8 and is native to the eastern U.S. So let's take a look at this little map. And we'll take a look at the columbine dusky wing too. So here you can see in bright green everywhere that this plant is native to. And look at that. I mean, more than half the country, this plant is present. So it's a really popular one. Again, it extends all the way, the growing range, that USDA range would be all the way from Minnesota, down to Texas. And here's a picture of the beautiful columbine dusky wing. And this actually belongs to the skipper family. And skippers are a type of butterflies that exhibit a erratic skipping flight pattern. So they're kind of in between butterflies and moths. And so they actually hold both sets of their wings open when landed, which is a different characteristic. And moths and butterflies kind of have a different behavior when it comes to landing. The butterflies close their wings and the moths actually keep them open.
And it is, since I put columbine in my landscape over the last couple years, I have seen some of these columbine dusky wing butterflies or skippers. So it just shows that if you plant it, they will come. And I'm having that thought as you were talking about this map, and I was thinking, wow, look at that huge area. We're not even on this one talking about Canada. Look at that huge area and that where this plant is native to, and yet do you ever see it? You know, for those of us who are intentionally planting it, but this plant was native all over the place, and who, up until 3, 4, 5 years ago, I had no, I was not at all aware of this plant. I mean, I may have been aware of some of the cultivars of this that I saw in garden centers, but the actual straight species native, I had never seen that before. It's native to this whole huge area, but yet all those years I had never seen it before.
Hopefully, at some point, these big box stores, get the message that people want to buy straight species and that it's important to plant native, and it's actually easier because they're going to survive when these plants, that you get from the local store are not going to survive because they don't like the soil or they don't like the specific conditions. These ones will.
Absolutely. Okay, so here we have Golden Alexander, a very important plant for many pollinators. It's blooming in my yard right now. So it's a great plant for a lot of little tiny, we think of the big bees, but there's a lot of little tiny sweat bees and other little tiny bees that we almost don't pay much attention to. They're smaller than even a little fly. You don't really pay much attention to them. They're doing some great pollination work, and I see a lot of those little non-stinging bees on the Golden Alexander. I will then also see it, and it is the host plant for, and we'll talk in a minute, for the swallowtail butterfly, but it likes full to part sun. And I would venture to say it will do fine in part shade because mine is kind of in a corner in the front of my house, which faces east, and there is a tree. So it gets quite a bit of shade where it is, and it's thriving. It likes medium soil, not too dry, not too wet. It will grow up to 3 feet tall and blooms April through June. So it has a very long bloom season of beautiful, bright, cheerful yellow flowers. It's it's hardy in zones 3 to 8, and it is native to the eastern US. So if you look here, you'll see that it's native to the eastern US. Look at the green. I'm hoping that you can see some of the areas out closer to the East Coast. You can see some yellow, and those are places where it, should be native, but it's really not found there anymore. And, so it's, some of these plants are kind of going extinct, so and their numbers generally are lesser and lesser. I mean, I would guarantee you that from the prairie days, even in the green parts that we're showing here, the number of plants is a mere fraction of what it used to be, but in some places it's almost becoming extinct in those areas. And here's a picture of the black swallowtail. And this is the host plant, our native host plant for the black swallowtail. An interesting thing about the black swallowtail is it is one of the few butterflies and moths that has been successful at as its native host decreased in our landscapes. It has been successful at using some other plants as a host plant, other plants that are in the same family as Golden Alexander, and that's our carrots, our dill, parsley. So you may have seen these caterpillars on those plants. Unfortunately, most of our butterflies and moths, so have not been so successful at crossing over to a new host.
Yeah, I grew some parsley and dill just for the butterflies and put that out. So I'm excited to see if maybe last summer I definitely saw a swallowtail butterfly on
They'll
my
come.
parsley. They
One
love
year
the
I had a
parsley.
parsley I had a parsley plant, or a few parsley plants in a big pot. And one year I had at least 10 swallowtail caterpillars in this one pot feeding off of that parsley plant. It was so cool.
It's amazing. Something so simple, and parsley is very easy to grow too. So nice to give them that support and that food that they want too. Those very hungry caterpillars.
Yep.
This is such a great plant, and it's one that's super important for our native bees. It's Ohio spiderwort. This one has a beautiful blue violet flower with a little yellow anthers in the center. And this is really, it's so interesting because it's open during the day, but it closes up at night. And it does that to conserve energy and make sure it's, got the resources that the bees need. So it'll bloom profusely in the morning and then close up in the heat of the afternoon unless it's cloudy or cooler. That conserves its energy and allows it to flower for even longer. This one likes full to part sun, moist to dry soil, gets 2 to 3 feet tall, blooms May through July, so we should be starting to see blooms soon. It will spread by
I am seeing
self-seeding.
some. I do have some. I have some on the west side of my house, yes.
They started blooming already. Wow.
Mhm.
I think mine got eaten a little bit by the rabbits, but that's okay. They need
On
food
the
too.
east side of my house, they're not blooming yet, but on the west side, no, the south side, they've just started blooming the last, like, say, 3 days. A few blooms, not full bloom.
This is the most exciting time, checking to see
I
what's
know.
happening with each plant. It's so cool. This one's hardy in zones 4 to 9. Is native to the eastern U.S. And if we look at the next slide with the map, we can see all the native range. So it's pretty extensive. Look at uh, how bright our green section is here in the central U.S. and Midwest. It's pretty important, and it's called Ohio spiderwort for a reason, I think. But the Circe Society for Invertebrate Conservation has listed Ohio spiderwort as of special value to our native bees for attracting a large number of them, including our bumblebees. And we know that how efficient our bumblebees are, so we want to do everything we can to support them and give them the nectar sources that they want.
And I wanna mention with this plant, it's such an important plant, and when it's blooming, it is absolutely gorgeous, loaded with those flowers, and on the previous slide, I was just noticing the intricacy of those flowers. They almost remind me of a little orchid or something. They're just gorgeous. But when the plant is done blooming, its foliage, a lot of native plants, the foliage stays beautiful and it's just, you know, gorgeous greenery in the garden. This plant admittedly gets a little spent looking, looks a little straggly when it's done blooming, can kind of, flop over or just so what I do and what's perfectly fine is go ahead and trim it when it's done blooming. Go ahead and trim it back in your garden and trim it to like 6 inches or so above the ground and it'll come back the next year perfectly fine, just like you do with your daffodils or something when you trim off that spent foliage because they're so beautiful when they're blooming, and as Lexi said, they're just so important to our native bumblebees. And so then when they're done, just trim them off and wait for their beautiful show the next year. Okay, foxglove beard tongue. I can attest to how cute it is to see little bumblebees going in and out of these little white flowers. They just seem to absolutely adore this plant. It adapts to many light conditions from full sun to part shade. So, like many of the plants we're talking about tonight, super duper adaptable. Medium to dry soil, grows up to 3 feet tall and blooms June and July. This is a very, very easy to grow plant. So, if you're somebody who's new to native plants, new to gardening in general, or not really interested in gardening and feeling like you have not a green thumb, but you'd like to add a few plants to your landscape to help out our pollinators, this would be a good one to start with. This would be one of the easiest, and there's a few other that we're talking about tonight, super easy. So this might be one that you want to try. Favorite of many native bee species, and it grows in zones 4 to 8. And as we'll see in the next slide, it's native to the eastern U.S. Here we go. And you can see where the bright green is. I'm forgetting now, Lexi. Do you remember what that almost turquoisey green is on the Bone App Legend, the
Um,
guide?
I can't remember. I'll have to look.
Yeah, I forget what that I remember seeing that color on there, but as you can see, this is, big plant in Illinois.
And that
And
confused
it is the host.
haploa.
Yeah, infused. I really want to know who came up with these names. It's the host plant for the infused Heploa moth. That's a pretty moth. Lots of
It's
color
beautiful. It looks like it has a leopard pattern or something. I mean, how exotic. It's so cool.
and very attractive to long-tongued bees.
And I'm sorry, that other green, that kind of blue green, it's present in county but introduced. So it wasn't there natively, and we know how plants can get around, by birds, insects, the wind. So it's not really too unusual to see that in counties next to ones where it's native, it may be introduced there.
Interesting, and just a it seems like where that's happened is it seems to have been more easily able to flourish further north. So maybe that's as our climate is warming, it's able to spread further north. Just a possibility. I'm not basing that on any knowledge. Just something I noticed from looking at the map.
And Bon told us this week that they're actually updating their maps. So these ones are 10 years old now, but by the end of the year, they're going to be updating all of their maps on their website. So if you're interested in learning more, the link is in the description for this video if you want to check out, if a certain species is native to your county. Okay, next one. This one is so interesting and exotic looking, which I think a
It
lot of our
is.
native plants are, but this one is like, where did that come from? This is called spotted bee balm. It's in the Monarda family, Monarda punctata. I think that's how you say it. Some people also call this one dotted mint, and I think horse mint too, right?
Mhm.
So a couple
Yeah.
different names you might have heard this called, but it's really been gaining popularity recently, which is great, and that's because it's a pollinator magnet. It's aromatic and colorful, and that's another reason why it attracts all these pollinators. The petals are lavender pink and yellow. And it's attractive to the rare Carner blue butterfly, which is actually endangered. So, this one, if you want to try and see this amazing looking butterfly, it is a favorite nectar source for that butterfly. It's also the host plant to this raspberry pyrosta butterfly. I'm probably saying that wrong, but look how interesting this thing is.
Wow, raspberry pyro.
Like
That's so pretty.
beautiful colors. I would love to see one of those in my
I
yard.
would love to.
Yeah. So imagine the creatures you can attract. And then also this gray marvel moth. And, the moths, a lot of the times they look very, very similar. They're definitely usually more the gray to the brown tones, but they have their own special characteristics. And there's another website that we've linked in the descriptions. It's Butterflies and Moths of North America, which we used to do a lot of the research for this presentation. But if you see a moth in your backyard and you're lucky enough to get a picture of it or a butterfly and you're not sure what it is, you can submit it there and they will help you identify. It's also a great way to track, these ones that are endangered and or might be, more threatened. That they can see pictures coming in from people, with the creature on the actual plant, and they do want to know what the plant is too, because obviously we all know this connection now that's so strong between the butterflies and moths and pollinators in our plants. So back to spotted bee balm, it is native in the eastern and central U.S. We did find that it said it was rare in New England, but again, it's an eccentric beauty, but it's also going to attract tons of bumblebees, and definitely it's a huge pollinator magnet, like most of the Monardas.
So I wanted to mention a few things about this. So a very wise, reliable native plant landscape designer told me that it seems to be, at least in his experience, much less prone to any powdery mildew. Anybody who's grown the other more common bee balm, Monarda fistulosa, gorgeous, and you know that the pollinators are just crazy about it, but it can be prone later in the season after it's done blooming to getting powdery mildew. And so he says that this is seems much less susceptible to that. It's also a much shorter plant, so maybe that is partially why. And I was just looking at this map, and isn't it interesting that you see this green all around, and yet right there, what is that, Virginia, West Virginia, is brown. So it's all around, but in West Virginia, not present. That is interesting to me. But
Yeah.
I wanted to mention, that this is the favorite nectar source for the Carner blue butterfly, the endangered butterfly. So the host plant for that butterfly is our wild lupine. And it the and I have tried growing wild lupine, and it's beautiful, but it doesn't do well for me. And I learned that it really prefers sandier soil. So I think I have too heavy of clay here, and that's why I never had any success. But boy, if your soil is a little bit on the sandier side, how cool would that be to have wild lupine and spotted bee balm to try to help these butterflies, because we talk a lot about monarchs, as we should, because they're on the road to extinction. But this Carner blue butterfly is I would venture to say, just as rare or more so than even the monarch.
Yeah. So anyone with sandy soil, try planting those two plants together. It's a stunning combination, but then you also get the added benefit of supporting the Carner blue.
I've always wanted to see a Carner blue, never did, at least not yet.
Not yet.
Okay,
Let's hope.
so prairie coreopsis, uh, terrific plant. This is an easy plant as well. It grows to 2 feet tall in partial to full sun, medium to dry soil, and it blooms June through August. It's very easy to grow and is extremely tolerant to poor soil conditions and drought. So again, if you're somebody who's not an avid gardener, that doesn't know a lot about plants, that doesn't have a lot, much time to spend taking care of your plants or watering your plants or so on, this would probably be a great choice for you. It is loved by pollinators, and the seeds are adored by birds. So this would be a powerhouse ecosystem plant that would be easy to take care of. But remember, it's going to need a little, some water the first couple of years till it develops a good, healthy root system. But then it should be pretty maintenance free. It's hardy in zones 3 to 8, and it's native in the central US. So we really are, the prairie state. And you can see here that we were really home to the prairie coreopsis. And it supports, wow, look at that, 22 native bee species. And it's the host plant to the wavy lined emerald moth. What a beautiful color that moth is.
Gorgeous. There's some gorgeous moths, and they really deserve, our attention. And, it's not just that annoying thing that might fly into your house trying to get to the light. They are really beautiful creatures. So if one does that, try and rescue it and get it back outside.
They really are, and we like our butterflies so much, and we say that, the moths are nighttime butterflies, and a lot of people don't really care for the moths, but they really are. They're the unsung heroes. They really are so important at the base of our food chain.
Yep. Now, this one is a powerhouse, rose milkweed, also known as swamp milkweed. It's an exceptional plant for pollinators, and it's actually native in so much of our country. It attracts hawk moths, swallowtails, fritillaries, monarchs, skippers, bumblebees, and other nectar seekers. Even an occasional hummingbird will come to this plant. As most people know, that this is the host plant for the monarch butterflies, so it is absolutely essential that we plant this plant. It's also the host plant for the queen butterfly, the dogbane tiger moth, the milkweed tussock moth, and all plants that are in this genus, Asclepias, this one's Asclepias incarnata, are going to be a larval host plant for the monarch butterfly. So this is a critically important plant. It's also just gorgeous. It likes medium to wet soil. It's 3 to 4 feet tall. I just planted another 40 or 50 of these because that's
Just
such an
another
important plant.
just another 40 or 50
Just that I grew from seed.
that she
It's
grew from
possible.
seed from her last year's plants. She, got the seed together and she grew another 40, 50 plants for this year.
They're in the ground, and they're going to be a little bit tender the first week or two or month or so, but once they get going, they really take hold. So I'm really excited to see this color and brightness come, and then all the creatures that it's going to attract as well. Because last year I saw numerous, I didn't count them, I should have done that, but numerous of the monarch caterpillars. And we go to the next slide, we can see what the monarch caterpillar looks like. And as you start to pay attention to the butterflies visiting your garden and the moths, you'll see these different caterpillars and you'll begin to be able to identify them. So this is our monarch caterpillar, and of course the monarch butterfly on the rose milkweed. But look at that native range. I mean, that is impressive. This should just become a national plant.
It really should. It really should. I don't know what's up with Mississippi there. That again, that's another holdout.
Right.
That's unusual, but it is. And one thing I wanted to mention about this, don't let the name swamp milkweed uh, deter you. Yes, it will do well in wet conditions, in some very wet conditions, but it doesn't have to have wet conditions. It also does very well in medium soil. It probably would suffer some in a drought or very dry soil. So you maybe wouldn't want to put it in a very dry place unless you're willing to water it. But your average garden soil, it will do absolutely fine. And I think I have 3 species of milkweed in my landscapes, and every time I find a monarch egg or caterpillar, it's always on this species of milkweed. Not to say that I mean the other species they do, it is a host plant, but in my yard they really seem to favor this variety. How about you, Lexi?
So far I only have the swamp milkweed planted.
Mhm.
I did actually grow some common milkweed from seed too, so I'm going to try a little bit of that. Um, but yeah, I think, I saw so many last year, and I saw little tiny baby ones to big fat caterpillars. So something was definitely working for them and they were happy to be there. So here are just a couple other of uh, the host plant. That milkweed is a host plant for these moths and butterflies. So here we've got the milkweed tussock moth. Again, something that's so common is that the actual creature is named after the plant that its host plant. We've also got the queen butterfly, which can look very similar to the monarch, but the coloring is just a little bit more subtle. And then the dogbane tiger moth. I see lots of white moths around, or they might be white butterflies. I'm not exactly sure what I'm seeing, but I don't know if you know if this one is diurnal or nocturnal, this particular moth.
I all moths by nature are nocturnal, except like the only exception I know of, and if anybody watching this, put it in the chat if you know of another one. The only one that I know of that is diurnal is that hummingbird clearwing moth that you mentioned. But other than that, all moths are nocturnal. I think the white that you're probably seeing is the cabbage white butterflies, which are very prevalent, and they are actually not native. But
Okay.
so and a lot of people that vegetable garden, I know you vegetable gardeners out there, loathe the cabbage white butterflies because they'll go after your cabbage and your broccoli and stuff. But they're actually, I believe, they're a non-native butterfly, so they're still kind of cool to see. And hopefully, a bird is going to feed off of those caterpillars before they damage your broccoli plant. But yeah, I mean, and I'm just looking at these pictures of these, and my I have a theory that one of the reasons why we kind of don't like tend to not like insects or embrace insects or even give much thought to insects is because they're so small and you can't see their eyes. So they kind of don't you don't connect with them in the same way that you can connect with other larger animals where you can see those eyes. And when we see some of these blown up photos and you see these eyes and you see these beautiful creatures and the beautiful colors and realize how their very existence is completely reliant on the presence of these plants in our landscapes and how these plants have been removed, almost completely. And it's just so important to get some of these plants back for them. Okay, the next milkweed, and this one, like I said, my monarch caterpillars seem to love my swamp milkweed, but this is such a pretty plant, and this is a beautiful landscape plant, and I don't care whether you're putting it in your backyard, your side yard, or the middle of your front yard. This is a plant where it is just a showstopper and it's suitable for any landscape, no matter how formal your landscape is. It does like full sun and it likes medium to dry soil. It really does prefer dry soil. So don't overwater this. When it's young, you need to be sure that you're giving it water and you're not letting it, dry out in a drought. But once it's established, and this does tend to send down a pretty good sized taproot, it really does prefer a dry soil. It only gets to be 2 feet tall in a nice, small, contained, mounded habit. It blooms June through August. And again, it is a host plant that supports the monarch caterpillar. And they also love the nectar of the flowers. Prolific orange blooms in hot sun. Very rare to see native orange plants, so that right there is unique and so bright and cheerful in the landscape. It is hardy in zones 3 to 9, and it's native to eastern and central U.S. as well as eastern Canada. So we can see that this goes way up in some of these. I know we had some viewers that were asking about plants in Canada. So a lot of the plants that we're talking about are native even much further north than the US. And here's some of the the butterflies that rely on butterfly weed and as the Asclepias family as their for their host to host their young. Of course, the monarch butterfly, but look at this, it's also the host plant for the queen butterfly. I did not know that. That's very cool, and it's interesting that it has that same orange color.
It is, yeah. And I hadn't even heard of this butterfly before. I've definitely seen tons of monarchs, not tons, they're actually dwindling. But I haven't seen this
But I've
butterfly
never
before.
seen this one.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
So something to look out for this summer. I saw a monarch actually 2 days ago, and I'm wondering if it's a little bit too early. Just seemed slightly early, but
Well, it's got milkweed in your yard. You just put in another 40 plants.
well, no, this was somewhere else. It wasn't my yard, so I
Oh,
was very surprised to see it. I just thought they come a little bit later, but
yeah. Usually, I mean, I haven't seen any yet, but
things are changing. The environment's changing.
yeah.
That's why we've got to do our part to help.
Yeah.
This plant is so easy to grow and is just a classic prairie plant, the purple coneflower. It is a favorite nectar source for butterflies, bees, and other pollinators, including hummingbirds. They just love this plant. And then later on in the season, the birds love to eat the seeds. It looks great in any size garden. It does have that kind of formal look to it too. So it would be great, like Kathy said, in your front yard, backyard, anywhere that you need that pop of color. And it actually blooms for a really long time. So from July through September, my purple coneflowers were already starting to have buds for their flowers. So they're getting ready to bloom. This one likes medium wet to medium dry soil, so not super picky about its soil conditions. full to part sun. It grows to 4 feet tall. I've grown this plant successfully from seed. I think I've grown over 300 of them now. It is so easy to grow from seed. You don't have to do cold stratification or anything, but it's a really great way to get this beautiful color into your garden. This one is native to the eastern US. And let's just see, we've got some supporting slides here. So here we can see the monarch and a bee at the same time on the same flower, plus the hummingbird. How beautiful is that? They just go and get their nectar and flitter away. So again, just a super important nectar source. And again, into that late season, that's what's important for our monarchs migrating. And here we've got our native map, and you can see more yellow for this one where it used to be, but it's not found. So again, definitely want to plant this one. It was a really important plant for the Native Americans too, for medicinal purposes. So anytime you hear about echinacea, this is the plant, and people love to make tea out of it still.
So this is the other species of Monarda that we were talking about earlier, the Monarda fistulosa or wild bergamot. This is an understatement to say that this is a favorite nectar source for many native pollinators, including hummingbirds. When this is in bloom, this is this is definitely the water cooler or the hot spot of the garden. Everybody's there. Everybody's there chatting and drinking and the whole thing. It is it is just so popular. And when this is blooming, I just love when this one is blooming because I see so many unique species of native bees. And then when it's done blooming, I never see them again. And I don't see them before, and I don't see them when it's done blooming, but they all descend on the garden when this is in bloom. It's just amazing. It is a larval host plant as well. Likes full to part sun, dry to moist soil, so very, very adaptable. Gets 2 to 4 feet tall and blooms July through September. This is another one that's very easy to grow. This is the species that is more prone to getting the powdery mildew when it's done blooming. You can always, if it gets unsightly, you could trim the plant off, but you definitely don't want that to dissuade you from planting this plant because it's such a favorite source of nectar for our pollinators and just such a joy when it's in bloom because of all of the attention it gets and all of the life that comes around it when it's blooming. This is actually it's good in zones, hardy in zones 3 to 9, and it is native to most of the US and Canada. So it has a really huge native range you can see here, other than basically it just looks like all we have is the very coastal, well, not even just southern, but California and Florida. That seems, and maybe up there like by Nova Scotia or something. But this is pretty much native in most of North America, and it is the host plant to the raspberry pyrosta butterfly. There's another.
I think
What
that's right.
beautiful!
Yeah.
Yeah, how pretty is that? And host plant to the hermit sphinx moth.
Don't you just want to pet that moth? Like it looks so fuzzy and furry.
I know. It's so cute. I'm just sitting here eating. Yes, I know we're crazy. We people are thinking, "Oh my God, these two are too much." Yeah, well, indulge us.
Okay, here's a showstopper, and the name doesn't really do it justice, but slender mountain mint. It's called slender because the leaves are pretty slender. And this family, this genus, I'm going to say this totally wrong, but pycnathium means densely packed flowers. And you can see how densely packed these little flower heads are. And that's why it's so attractive to our pollinators. You can see a cute little bee on here now. But the typical visitors are lots of our native bees, even some beetles, pearl crescent butterflies, and most of them are seeking nectar from this plant. It also has a particularly strong mint aroma especially when it's crushed or cut, and bees are attracted to that mint smell too. So things that are in the mint family, they like that smell. It grows to 2 feet tall, so it's on the shorter side. A full to part sun, medium soil, blooms June through September. That's another nice thing about these plants with the smaller flowers. They just keep going and going and going. So imagine that 4 months of blooms. It doesn't get better than that. It is a clump forming plant, so you'll have a nice clump of these beautiful white flowers. And then it's deer and rabbit resistant because they do not like mint compared to our native bees. It's good in zones 4 to 9, and this is native in the eastern US. So we'll take a look at this next slide where we can see its native range. So you can see most of the Midwest out to the east, and this is the pearl crescent butterfly. How beautiful is that butterfly?
I love that butterfly, and I've been so thrilled because I've been seeing that butterfly almost every day in my landscape. And guess what I have? I planted slender mountain mint about 3 years ago, and so now I'm being treated to having the pearl crescent butterfly flitzing through my landscape every day.
It's the butterfly show. It doesn't get much better than that.
Mhm. And I just wanted that's a great point that you brought up, Lexi, about the mint family. So if anybody has a real, a significant issue with rabbits and a lot of, I mean, a dense rabbit population in your area and feels it's very difficult to grow plants, some of the best ones that you can try are in the mint family. So that would be any of the mountain mints. This particular one is the slender mountain mint we're talking about. There are a couple other varieties of mountain mint as well. And the monardas that we talked about, both the uh, Monarda fistulosa and the Monarda picata, I believe the name of it was.
Puncata, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of those are gonna be very rabbit resistant. Not to say that a very hungry rabbit that's starving, they'll eat pretty much anything, but chances are, unless you have just a really crazy, and with nothing else for them to eat, those would be very good plants for you to go with if you do feel like you have an excessive amount of rabbits in your area. Rough blazing star. I mean, talk about beautiful. The each one of those flowers that grows on the longer stem, it's like a work of art. It's little individual flowers that are made up of little individual flowers. It's just amazing with those little hairs coming out, and just just gorgeous when you see these things up close. They're just amazing. It too is loved by many pollinators, really, and I see so many butterflies when my blazing stars are blooming. Likes full to part sun, medium to dry soil, and gets 2 to 3 feet tall. It does bloom later in the summer in August and September, uh, zones 3 to 8, and it's native to the central US and Canada. So let's see what that map looks like. So see over to the east and especially the northeast and in the eastern Canada, we don't see it. It's mostly in the central and not at all out to the west. But look at these little cuties that it's a host plant for, meaning its larvae need this plant in order to feed. So the three-lined flower moth, beautiful. This I can't read this one because of a thing. Whoops! Because of a little patch on my computer screen because I'm sharing my screen, Lexi. What is that something flower moth called? What is that first word?
The glorious flower moth. I think because it's pink and so beautiful.
We have the blazing star borer moth, and we have that wavy lined emerald moth, which we saw a few slides earlier that obviously has a couple of more than one host plant, native host plant.
And that blazing star borer moth, I believe it's another bee impersonator. Wouldn't you think that was a bee at first if you saw it?
I would. Absolutely, I would. So you wonder if like that's something that has evolved over time as a protection that they take on the look of a bee.
So
That's
cool.
been a defense mechanism, but that does look like a bee. Okay, here's some other ones. Wow, this is an active plant. So rough blazing star is loved by the little carpenter bee. These are all the bees that just love this plant. The little carpenter bee, the Luna moth, those are spectacular. Did you ever see one in person, Lexi?
No, I haven't seen that or a painted lady, so I'm hoping to see something this summer.
The Luna moths are just they're spectacular. I mean, they're at least 6 inches wide. They're just beautiful. The black swallowtail loves this plant. We talked about that earlier with the golden Alexander. The painted lady and the loves this plant, and so does our leafcutter bees. Those are great little bees that come out later in the season,
So
and they
amazing
don't
that one
sting.
plant.
Another powerful pollinator, no stinger, solitary bee, completely safe.
That bee is so cool too, because if you see a little circle patch cut out of a leaf, it's probably from that leaf cutter bee. And I
Mhm.
believe they use them to build things within their hive, whereas other ones use wax
There's mud
instead.
and mud, yes, you're right, and they really like redbud and roses. Those are some of their favorites for cutting the circles out to build their little cavities to put their eggs in.
So interesting. So much activity happens when we're not even looking. We can't even see it all happening. That's the magic of nature. So this is showy goldenrod. It is the most beautiful out of the goldenrods, and it is not an aggressive goldenrod. So sometimes goldenrod gets a bad rap for being a cause of hay fever or for spreading too much. That is one called Solidago canadensis, I believe. That's a Canada goldenrod that's just bigger and a little bit more aggressive. But this one is a super important powerhouse plant. It is called a keystone plant, and that is because it is a powerhouse that's supporting biodiversity. So if you can, please plant this plant. It provides a critical late season nectar for our pollinators and migrating monarchs. So those queen bees who need to get that nectar to just save up their energy because they're going to overwinter while the rest of their hive dies off, they need the energy from this plant. And so do our monarchs to get all the way down to Mexico. It is also a larval host plant. This one definitely likes full to part sun and medium to dry soil, up to 3 feet tall. Mine, I think, got to 4 feet tall last year, but it'll bloom super late, September through November. So once that blazing star is just ending its blooming, this is going to pop. So you'll have some of that purple and yellow together. And you can also plant it with asters. That's going to be a really nice combination, and this is good in zones 3 to 8. It's native to the eastern and central US. And the seed heads are also important for our birds in the winter. So the migrating birds in the fall, and then our local winter birds, they're also going to really feast off of these seeds in the winter. So the chickadees and the woodpeckers really like the seeds from this plant. So here we show it's supporting the monarch butterfly, but it's also host to this strange little fly. And if you ever see these big bulges on the stem of the goldenrod, this is just nature doing its interesting thing. So it's a host plant, which means that the gallfly will actually lay its eggs, its larvae, within the stem of this plant, and it protects them over winter within the stem. And then also some other creatures might actually eat that larva, so it's a food source and a protein source for them. So that's the cycle of life, and sometimes it does weird and unexpected things.
Sure shows you why we should wait till spring to cut back our garden because there could be goldenrod galls in our old stems that are protecting that are overwintering the young gallfly, right?
Exactly.
All right, aromatic. So Lexi mentioned planting asters with our goldenrods, another keystone plant. And I can't say enough, if we want to prevent the extinction of our monarch butterfly, uh, we need to get milkweed into our landscapes, number one. But number two, we need to get asters and goldenrods into our landscapes because those are the plants that really do the bulk of the work in sustaining our migrating monarchs as they migrate back south. So we can do the best we can with them being able to be raised on our milkweed, but then they need these plants to make that long journey south. So aromatic aster is a beautiful aster for your garden. It only grows about 2 feet tall, so it's not a super tall aster. It does like full sun in medium to dry soil. And look at how late this thing blooms. It blooms all the way into October and November. So this is, again, sustaining those monarchs and also sustaining bees that are going to be, and other butterflies and moths that are going, the ones that overwinter. It is a keystone plant. And again, keystone plant means a plant that has significant effect on the state of our local ecosystem. And all of these native plants have great effect, great positive effect on our local ecosystem, but some even more. And if you have limited space, the best thing you can do with your space is try to get some of these keystone plants in. They'll give you the most bang for your buck. And as we said earlier, showy goldenrod and the asters, and this is one of those asters. It is a very late blooming aster, again, for pollinators preparing to overwinter. And this is native to eastern and central US. So here's the map here. So again, not New England, not the southeast, but the central, and not the west, and not at all in Canada. So it is especially helpful to the monarch butterfly because it is going to give them the late season food they need to migrate. The silvery checker spot, I have seen those in my garden. I have seen those. And again, I can't see this. What is the name of this bee, Lexi?
That is a sweat bee, and that one's included here because this is a short-tongued insect, and you can see how the center of this flower is perfect for the short-tongued insects.
Yeah, those guys are very tiny. They're very, very sweet little things.
Okay, so now we have prairie dropseed, and this is just such an elegant, beautiful plant to include in your garden. Include it in sets of 3 or 4 or 5 and clumps like this. It just has a really stunning effect. This plant is actually considered endangered in a couple of states in Connecticut, Kentucky, Maryland, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. So if you're in any of those states, definitely think about planting this plant because it is the host plant for 6 different species of butterflies or moths, including some endangered ones that we're going to take a look at. But it's really very cool to think of this type of grass looking plant that can support this much life. It's also a great shelter for birds, so they can hide in there, and it just has a beautiful smell. I think it smells kind of like buttery popcorn. Is that right, Kelly?
Yeah, yeah, it does.
So like
It
anything
makes
in the
me hungry.
grass. Makes yeah, makes us hungry. Anything in the grass family, it's gonna like sunnier conditions. So full to part sun for this one. Medium wet to dry soil, so it's very adaptable. It's only gonna get to about 2 feet tall. It does kind of send up these little shoots later in the season. It's the seed head, so that part might get a little bit taller, but it's just a beautiful kind of wispy, feathery thing. And this one is hardy in zones 3 to 9, and it is native to the central US. So here we can see its range, and here are two of the skippers that are actually endangered. So again, a skipper is one that it's called a skipper because of the way it flies around. It kind of flutters a little bit differently. So we have the Powashek skipperling and the Dakota skippered, which are both endangered. And then we've got another couple of different moths too that it is host for. But we don't have pictured. So
But we always think of the flowering plants and we don't think of how important those grasses are. And like you said, they're host plants for some of our endangered and other pollinators. We don't think of them as being the host plant, but they are. They're very important parts of our ecosystem. They provide a tremendous amount of seed for our birds in the winter, and they provide a lot of habitat as underneath those grasses for both our overwintering insects and cover to protect birds from predators. So they're very important to incorporate into our landscapes. And another example of an amazing native grass for our landscapes is little bluestem. And I'm not going to say that Latin name. And as its common name does describe, though, it has a beautiful blue color in our landscapes. It likes full to part sun, medium to dry soil, and this will get up to 3 feet tall. It blooms, it gets those seed heads in July through October. It gives you great fall color, and I can attest to that. I just added some little blue stem 2 years ago, and I had beautiful red fall color, and it looked beautiful throughout the winter. I have to say, I loved it. And I saw so many birds feeding on the ground under it all winter. It just a wonderful grass. It spreads well via seeds, and it is very tolerant of poor soil conditions. So this is going to be another pretty easy plant if you feel tentative about your gardening skills or your time limitations. Uh, but it's not a real, it's not a terribly, I mean, it'll spread well via seed, but it's not a terribly aggressive plant. So it won't establish it if it's against real tall competition. It'll get kind of smothered out. So you want to put it around like-size plants or shorter plants. It blooms July through October, so it's got those seed heads that are around for a long time. The zones 3 to 9, and this one is native to most of the U.S. Let's look at that map. Yeah, most of the U.S.
Wow.
and Canada, except parts of the West. So this is a very widespread native prairie grass, and it is the host plant for the cobweb skipper. He's got a cute face.
So cute. And this dusted skipper, I mean, he looks kind of like a raccoon.
Yeah. See, when you see their faces, you all might think I'm a nerd, but when you see their faces, it's like they're just, "Hello. Yes, I'm here. I'm not a nuisance. I'm here and I'm doing good work. You should like me."
And plant my plant for me.
My plant. So yeah, here's some more that they're a host plant for: the Otto skipper, the Delaware skipper. I can't read that other one, and the
uh,
swarthy skipper. What is
Crossline
that?
skipper.
What is the swarthy skipper up to? Is he a swarthy fellow?
Looks like he's on some latris there.
Yes, it does, and look at that long proboscis that comes out to get nectar out of those little flowers.
And even these top two, you can see how it'd be really hard to tell these apart. And especially if something is flying by so quickly. But if you can capture a photo and submit it to that website that's in the description of this video, maybe you can find out what you've got in your backyard. So again, it's a really fun pastime to do the gardening and plant the plants, but also then to look out for all of the creatures that are coming to visit.
It's so fun to identify something new that's come to your yard. It really makes it sink in that your yard truly is a habitat. I was so excited this morning. I looked out the kitchen window and I saw an ovenbird, and I had never ever had an ovenbird in the yard before. And I'm like, oh, I have another species, another species. I love it. So these are some plants that have significant benefit for various reasons to our pollinators, but they're not the only plants. So to find even more, visit our native plant selector on our website at sagmoraine.org. All of the plants that are listed on our native plant selector are good plants for smaller residential landscapes. All native plants are beautiful in the right environment, but they're not all beautiful in our home gardens. If they're too aggressive or they tend to fall over or they get 10 feet tall, they're beautiful in the prairie, but they may not be beautiful in our landscape. But all of the ones that are in our native plant selector have been vetted, and those are good for our smaller suburban and urban landscapes. And they're dependable plants for people of all gardening levels and experience. So whether you're a seasoned gardener or a newbie, these are great plants to start with in our native plant selector.
And we have our third annual native plant sale coming up. So if you're in the Chicagoland area, definitely come out and check out the plant sale. We'll have all of the plants available that we went over in this presentation, plus a ton more. So you can buy plants individually, or you can pre-order with this code Pollinator10. And we have a pollinator garden that's been designed by one of our landscape designer friends. So if you feel a little bit overwhelmed and just want everything done for you, you can get this package and this garden design, and it's all ready to go for you. And it's even got a little plan and design.
Yes. So on our website, you can pre-order up until May 12th one of these pollinator picnic garden packages. They come in three sizes: 10 plants, 20 plants, and 50 plants. So that ranges from anywhere from 25 square feet to 100 square feet. And this gives you not just the plants, but it gives you how to arrange those plants. So you have the little map, the design here to show you how to arrange them. And these gardens are also 4 seasons that will provide wonderful habitat throughout spring, summer, fall, and winter. And again, it is packed with many of the favorite plants of our native pollinators. So you can find those on sagmoraine.org and order by May 12th if you are in the Chicago area and interested. And here's an example. You'll get the design, but you'll also get a listing of all of the plants that are in there. And all of the plants that we went over tonight are in the Pollinator Picnic 50 package. So again, check that out if you're in the area. But whether you're in the Chicago area or whether you're in another state or in Canada or wherever you are, thank you for watching this presentation, and we hope that you will incorporate more native plants into your landscape this season, and we hope that this provided some help and useful information to you. So thank you all, and